The lunchtime rush had just started at Willowbrook Cafe, the kind of cozy spot where regulars gathered and new faces popped in for a quick bite. Among the hum of chatter and clinking plates, an elderly woman slowly made her way to a corner table. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her purse down, her eyes scanning the menu. She looked out of place, dressed simply, her warm smile met with little notice from the busy staff. But to her, the cafe felt familiar in a way that went beyond the food. Across the room, a waitress named Jenna hurried from table to table, her patience running thin. She had been working double shifts all week, and the last thing she wanted was another demanding customer. When she approached the elderly woman, her voice carried a sharp edge. "You ready to order or what?" she snapped, barely meeting her eyes. The woman's voice was soft but steady. "I'll have the tomato soup and a side of toast, please." Jenna rolled her eyes and scribbled the order carelessly. "Sure, but don't expect it fast," she muttered under her breath before rushing off. Minutes passed, and when Jenna returned, she placed the bowl on the table with a thud. "Here, happy now," she said with a forced smile. She didn't notice the soup's surface, slightly disturbed, or the hint of something that shouldn't be there. The elderly woman paused, her eyes flickering to Jenna. "Thank you, dear," she said softly, her gaze lingering a moment longer than expected. From behind the counter, unseen by Jenna, the cafe owner, Mr. Reynolds, watched the interaction. His expression shifted from confusion to something colder, because he knew exactly who the elderly woman was. Jenna, still oblivious, turned back to her other tables, unaware that her impatience had just crossed a line she could never take back. The cafe felt warmer, the usual comfort of the place unchanged. But beneath the surface, tension brewed, because the next few moments would change everything. And as the woman lifted the spoon to her lips, Mr. Reynolds stepped forward, his voice cutting through the air, firm, unmistakable. "Jenna, we need to talk." Jenna froze, the sound of Mr. Reynolds' voice sending a chill down her spine. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, her usual smirk faltering. "Something wrong?" she asked, her tone guarded. Mr. Reynolds' eyes, normally warm and easygoing, held something unfamiliar: disappointment. "Step aside for a second," he said, his voice calm but firm. The elderly woman set her spoon down gently, her gaze meeting Mr. Reynolds. "It's been a long time, Matthew," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that felt personal. Jenna's confusion deepened. "Wait, you asterisk no asterisk her?" she asked, her eyes darting between them. Mr. Reynolds kept his focus on the woman. "Yeah, I do. Very well." He paused, his jaw tightening. "She's my mother." Jenna's stomach dropped. The heat in her cheeks burned with sudden regret. She opened her mouth, searching for words, an excuse, an apology, anything, but nothing came out. The cafe, still buzzing with customers, felt like it had gone silent around them. Jenna's heart pounded. Asterisk is mother, the owner's mother asterisk. The elderly woman, Mrs. Reynolds, glanced back at Jenna, her expression unreadable. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she said softly. "I just wanted to see the place, to see how he's been doing." Jenna felt a twist in her chest, part guilt, part confusion. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice small now. Mr. Reynolds folded his arms. "No, you didn't. But that's the thing, Jenna. You shouldn't have to asterisk no asterisk who someone is to treat them with kindness." Jenna felt her throat tighten. She had worked at the cafe for nearly a year, always fast, always efficient. But had she been too quick to judge people who didn't fit into her rushed routine? Mrs. Reynolds spoke again, her voice gentle but clear. "People aren't just orders to fill, dear. They're stories you haven't heard yet. Jenna's heart sank further, but before she could speak, Mr. Reynolds' next words landed heavily. "I need to decide if this is the kind of person I want on my team," he said, his eyes steady on her. The air around them felt thick with uncertainty, and Jenna's pulse quickened. "Mr. Reynolds, please," she began, but his expression didn't change. Because now everything hung in the balance, and Jenna didn't know if there was any way to fix what had just been broken. Jenna's chest tightened as the weight of Mr. Reynolds' words sank in. She felt the stares of customers, their conversations quieter now, the tension thick. "Mr. Reynolds," she started, her voice unsteady. I messed up. But it wasn't about her. She paused, unsure how to explain the stress she carried without it sounding like an excuse. Before he could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Marco, the head cook, called out, "Jenna." Table 4's still waiting on their drinks. His voice was sharp, clearly frustrated by the backup. Jenna's pulse quickened. She felt pulled in every direction, her job, her pride, and now this sudden confrontation. She turned to Mr. Reynolds, her voice low but urgent. "I'm not trying to brush this off. Just let me finish this shift, and we'll talk." Mrs. Reynolds, watching quietly, placed a hand on her son's arm. "Matthew, let her work. I'm not here to see her punished. I'm here to understand how your cafe really runs." Her voice was soft, but the message was clear. Mr. Reynolds' jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Go, finish your tables. But we will talk." Jenna rushed back to her section, her heart pounding. She felt the burn of embarrassment, but something else too. Anger at herself. As she refilled drinks, her mind spun. How could I have been so careless? At the counter, Marco muttered under his breath. "Maybe if you spent less time snapping at customers and more time working, we wouldn't be behind." Jenna whipped her head around. "Excuse me." She shot back, her frustration boiling over. Marco leaned on the counter, his eyes cold. "You've been on edge all week, Jenna. You're fast, but you're not exactly friendly. And now it's caught up with you." Jenna opened her mouth to snap back but stopped. His words, blunt as they were, hit a nerve. Meanwhile, Mrs. Reynolds quietly observed from her seat. She noticed the tension, not just between Jenna and her, but within the cafe itself. The rushed service, the clipped conversations between staff, something was off. Her eyes softened. This place used to feel different, she thought. And perhaps the real problem ran deeper than just one waitress's bad attitude. But as the clock ticked and Jenna felt the walls closing in, she couldn't shake the feeling. Her entire future here was on the line. And the worst part, she wasn't sure if there was anything she could do to fix it. The cafe buzzed with tension, but Jenna's thoughts were louder than the clatter of plates and chatter of customers. Every move felt heavy, every glance from Mr. Reynolds like a warning. She knew the clock was ticking, not just on her shift, but on her entire job. Suddenly, a sharp voice rang out from the front. "Excuse me, is anyone going to fix this?" A woman at a nearby table held up a cold, untouched coffee, her frustration clear. Jenna's heart pounded. She darted over, her voice tight but polite. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me get you a fresh one." But before she could, the woman snapped, "I've been waiting forever." What kind of service is this? Jenna felt her temper flare, but she bit her tongue. "I understand, ma'am. I'll fix it right away," she said, her voice strained but calm. She rushed to the counter, but behind her, she heard Marco mutter, "Told you. She's always got customers complaining." Jenna's hand gripped the coffee pot tightly. She spun around, her voice low but sharp. "You got something to say, Marco, or are you just watching me fail?" Marco's eyes narrowed. I'm just saying, you treat customers like they're a problem. Maybe if you slowed down and stopped acting like you're the only one working, people wouldn't be so mad. Jenna's pulse pounded. You think I don't care? I'm trying to keep this place running while you stand back there criticizing. The cafe had gone quieter now, eyes flicking toward their heated exchange. And standing near the corner, watching everything, was Mr. Reynolds. His expression darkened, his voice cutting through the tension. Asterisk both asterisk of you. My office. Now. Jenna's stomach dropped. She followed Mr. Reynolds into the back, her heart racing. The small office felt suffocating as the door clicked shut. Before anyone could speak, Mrs. Reynolds stepped forward from the doorway. I think, she said, her voice calm but firm, we all need to hear the truth about what's really going on here. Jenna's breath caught. She felt the walls closing in, because whatever came next could change everything. And there was no running from it now. The room felt thick with tension as Mrs. Reynolds stepped forward, her calm gaze sweeping between Jenna and Marco. Before you both tear each other apart, she said softly, there's something you should know. She turned to her son. Matthew, you don't just have a staffing problem. You have a asterisk trust asterisk problem. Jenna's brow furrowed. What does that mean? She asked, her voice tight. Mrs. Reynolds' eyes lingered on Marco. You've been here a long time, haven't you? Marco's expression hardened. 6 years. Longer than asterisk her asterisk, he said, his tone sharp. She nodded thoughtfully. Then you must know this place better than anyone. Which is why I'm curious. Why are there so many complaints lately? Why is the kitchen always behind? She paused, her voice gentle but cutting. Is it really all Jenna's fault? Marco's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. Suddenly, Mr. Reynolds' phone buzzed. He glanced down, his face darkening. Another online review, he muttered. Complaining about slow service and cold food. His eyes snapped to Marco. What's going on back there? Jenna, her nerves still raw, felt something shift in her gut. She turned to Marco, her voice slower now. Yeah, why asterisk is asterisk everything always late from the kitchen? Marco's fists tightened at his sides. Maybe because I'm tired of working twice as hard while you get away with being rude to customers, he snapped. You think you're the only one under pressure. Jenna's frustration flared. I never said that, but you've been gunning for me since day one. Mrs. Reynolds watched them carefully. Then, in a calm voice, she asked, Marco, have you been holding orders back on purpose? The air felt like it had been sucked from the room. Marco's face stiffened. That's ridiculous, he shot back, but his voice wavered. Jenna's eyes widened. Wait, are you? She stopped, the pieces clicking together. Mr. Reynolds' voice was cold now. Marco, answer her. Marco's face flushed, his defenses cracking. He faltered, then his voice dropped, bitter and raw. Yeah, maybe I slowed things down a couple times, but only because I was sick of her attitude. She's been snapping at everyone, and you never call asterisk her asterisk out. So yeah, I made sure she felt some heat for once. Jenna's chest tightened with shock, anger, and disbelief. You sabotaged me just to prove a point. Marco's voice was sharp. You think you're the victim. You've been treating people like they're in your way. I just made sure the customers saw it. Mr. Reynolds' voice was ice cold. You didn't just hurt Jenna. You hurt asterisk my business asterisk. Jenna's pulse pounded, her face flushed. But behind her anger, something else burned. Asterisk hurt asterisk. This wasn't just about orders or customers. This was personal. Mrs. Reynolds, her voice soft but firm, broke the silence. So now we know the truth. But what we don't know is what happens next. The air in the room was heavy, the next move inevitable. And the choice, who stayed, who left, was seconds away. The silence in the office felt like it could snap. Marco's confession hung heavy in the air, and Jenna's heart pounded, torn between anger and disbelief. Mr. Reynolds' voice, low and cold, broke through. "You sabotaged my cafe, my customers, my trust." His jaw tightened. "You're done here, Marco. Effective immediately." Marco's face darkened, his voice bitter. "Figures. 6 years of loyalty, and you toss me like nothing." All because of asterisk her asterisk, he shot a glare at Jenna. "You know what? Good luck. You'll need it." Without another word, he ripped off his apron and stormed out, the office door swinging behind him. Jenna stood frozen, her chest tight. She felt relief, but it was tangled with guilt. I didn't want this," she said softly, her voice unsteady. "I know I messed up with customers, but I didn't want anyone to lose their job." Mr. Reynolds' eyes were on her, sharp but not unkind. "You didn't do this, Jenna. Marco did." But his voice lowered. He was right about one thing. "Your attitude's been a problem." Jenna's stomach dropped. "I know," she whispered. "I've been so stressed, trying to keep up. But I let it change how I treated people. And I'm sorry." Her voice broke slightly. "I love this place. I didn't mean to hurt it." Before Mr. Reynolds could respond, Mrs. Reynolds, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke. "You know, Matthew," she said softly, "there's something you might be missing." She turned her kind eyes to Jenna. "I didn't come here today to test your staff. I came here because—" She paused, her voice steady but warm. "I wanted to see the person you've been considering to manage this cafe." Jenna's breath stopped. "What?" Mr. Reynolds' expression shifted, part surprise, part something else. "Mom," he started, then sighed. "It's true. I was looking for someone to help me run the place. And despite everything today, you showed me something I can't ignore." Jenna's heart pounded. "But after how I treated you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mrs. Reynolds smiled softly. "Yes, because you admitted your mistake. Because you fought for this cafe, even when everything turned against you. And because you care, more than you realize." Mr. Reynolds folded his arms, his voice firm but lighter now. "The truth is, Jenna, I don't want someone perfect. I want someone who asterisk learns asterisk." He paused, the weight of his words clear. "So if you're willing to grow, the job is yours." Jenna's throat tightened, a wave of emotion crashing over her. I don't know what to say." Mrs. Reynolds' eyes twinkled. "A simple yes usually works." Jenna felt her lips tremble, then broke into a small, disbelieving smile. "Yes. Asterisk absolutely. Yes asterisk." But just as the tension lifted, the office phone rang sharply. Mr. Reynolds frowned and answered. His expression shifted, first confusion, then alarm. "Wait, what? Slow down. What's happening out front?" Jenna's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" He set the phone down, his voice tight. "Marco, he's causing a scene. Out in the cafe." Jenna's heart jumped, the calm shattered in an instant. Without thinking, she darted for the door, adrenaline surging. "I'll handle it." Mrs. Reynolds' voice, soft but certain, followed her. "I believe you will." Because the truth was, Jenna wasn't the same person who started this shift. And whatever waited beyond that door, she was ready for it. Jenna rushed out of the office, her heart pounding. The cafe was filled with murmurs, customers glancing toward the front where Marco stood, his face flushed with frustration. His apron was gone, but the anger in his eyes hadn't left. "This place isn't as great as you all think," he said sharply, his voice carrying across the cafe. "You think management cares about you. They don't." Jenna took a deep breath, stepping forward. "Marco," she said firmly but not unkindly, "this isn't the way." His eyes snapped to hers, filled with resentment. "Easy for you to say. You're the one who got to stay." She held his gaze steady now. "I didn't win anything, Marco, and I never wanted to fight you. But what you did, making things harder for everyone, it wasn't fair. To me, to the customers, to yourself. For a moment, his expression flickered, something like regret crossing his face. But instead of answering, he shook his head. "Whatever. I'm done here." With that, he turned and walked out, letting the door swing shut behind him. The cafe was silent for a beat before things slowly returned to normal. Jenna let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Mr. Reynolds stepped beside her. "You handled that well," he said quietly. Jenna swallowed, still processing everything. "I don't know. I get it, you know? Feeling overlooked. Feeling like no one sees how hard you're working." Mrs. Reynolds smiled warmly. "And that, dear, is why you'll do well here." Jenna looked around the cafe, the place she had almost lost, the place that had tested her more than she'd ever expected. The stress, the mistakes, the lessons, it all led to this moment. As she turned back to Mr. Reynolds, her voice was steady. "So, when do I start?" He chuckled. "I'd say you already have." Jenna let herself smile, just a little. Because for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be.